In January of 1985, I was a professor of religion in the college and a volunteer fireman along with a dozen other faculty members and then all of our students.
I was a junior here at Sewanee and economics major, and I was playing on the varsity basketball team.
I was about to leave for Paris, France, where I was studying. I was a French and political science joint major.
In 1985, I was a second semester freshman. I was 19 years old, still getting adjusted to college life when this tsunami of a weather event hit.
I like to duck hunt and was down on the lake here at Tim's Ford. It was a Saturday afternoon. And we'd had weather forecasts, and of course, nothing like the weather coverage that we have now. But weather forecast said there was a cold front moving in. Well, it started moving in Saturday afternoon, and we noticed that it had been kind of balmy. We were in shirt sleeves, duck hunting, and it started getting really chilly, so we put on our jackets, and out in front of our blind in a field, we noticed there was skim ice starting to form. The temperature was really plummeting. Well, the temperature continued to plummet and plummet and plummet. And by the time I got home around dark, it was down below freezing, way below freezing. And that night it just kept going down and down. And the high the next day on Sunday was 11 below zero. That night the temperature continued to go down. And I had two black lab dogs. I went out during the night to walk the dogs. And Sewanee sounded like a rifle range. You hear these loud pops, just like gunshots, all over campus. And what it was that the limbs of the trees were breaking under the cold. They were contracting and contracting, and sometimes they would just get to the point that they exploded. By about 6 a.m. on Monday morning, the temperature had dropped to 24 below zero.
I was glad that I was in France. It was cold there, but it wasn't as cold as it was here.
It was the coldest spike we've ever seen in Tennessee. 24 below zero. Everything froze. The water lines and buildings froze and pipes burst.
We didn't have smartphones. We weren't watching the Weather Channel. We weren't really tuned in to the potential of something as severe as an ice storm.
Wednesday, it started raining at 25 degrees. The temperature had risen a little bit. As it started raining with that deep cold, every raindrop froze. And the grass crusted over, the roofs crusted over. But the most critical thing was that on every branch and twig, ice started to form, as well as on the power lines up and down the streets.
Some people from Florida had never seen ice and snow.
When I tell you it was silent because of I don't know how many inches of ice being on the ground.
We had 3-inch diameters of ice on our power lines, 3-inch diameters of ice on the branches of the trees. Then you began to hear Wednesday evening, Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, on into the weekend, you began to hear these tremendous crashes of whole treetops coming down. And suddenly the campus became very, very dangerous.
Trees would split, limbs would fall, and it literally became a hazard to walk around the quad or along University Avenue in many respects, certainly after the sun went down.
There was no power, there was no plumbing even, there was nothing. And I can remember that we would go to the market to get batteries, and they were out.
I know that we literally woke up and it was as if we were in a disaster movie. It was remarkable, but beautiful at the same time. It was a sudden realization that a lot of things were different.
All the phone lines, the power lines, everything was stripped off the poles. The poles themselves broke and fell over. The whole infrastructure of phone lines and power service in Sewanee was broken. There was no power in people's houses. There was no power in the dorms. There was no power in the academic buildings. There was the only source of light in these buildings were candles.
I was in McCready and it was dark.
The only source of heat in the dorms, the only source of heat in houses, were fireplaces.
I can remember gathering in dorms with friends, and especially Court's dorm, and they had a fireplace, and we would gather there.
The students moved some of their mattresses. They turned the commons rooms of the dorms into these elaborate crash pads.
We would play board games and cards and just gather around the fire. I remember people pulling out guitars.
It was singing songs and telling stories and doing a lot of sleeping. There was just these bundled up groups of students, bundled up under blankets in the dorms, shivering and trying to stay warm.
There was suddenly nothing and everything to do. It was undetermined what we were going to do with our coursework. It was undetermined where we were going to go get something to eat.
I got a few letters in the mail about, you wouldn't believe the ice storm we just experienced.
When a tree splits or a huge limb falls today, there's a team of people who scrambles and all of a sudden it vanishes.
We had some students, the Clark brothers from Chattanooga, and they were good old boys of the best sort. Pickup trucks and chainsaws in the back. On their own, they just went out with their four-wheel drive pickup trucks and chainsaws in the back, and just wherever they saw a tree down across the driveway or across a part of the road, they just got out. The fire department was on duty 24 hours a day. We had fires breaking out all over the place because these fireplaces weren't designed to operate continuously. So people started having fires in their walls or sometimes chimney fires. The town water supply collapsed because we didn't have pumps to pump water back into the tower. In our staff meeting, we decided we need to appeal for help. And in the wonderful way that Sewanee could spin its contacts, Bob Ayers calls Jack Allen and says, we need some help. Can you get us some help from the government? Well, Bob Ayers knows that Jack Allen is the pastor of the vice president. So he calls the vice president and says, we really need some help. And vice president said, well, I'll see what I can do. So he calls the Pentagon. Turns out that there was a unit of Army Reserve engineers from Birmingham that had gone to Fort Knox for training and were coming back. Well, they get a command call from the Pentagon that says, we need you to go to Sewanee and supply a relief effort.
I remember trucks. I remember noise coming down University Avenue. I remember being impressed that they were able to do that on, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 inches of ice.
They had big lights on towers. They were loaded with generators. They came in and set up a generator for each dorm.
So being part of the basketball team, I think Fowler Center had a generator, and they finally opened that up, and so we were able to have plumbing, and the second floor had this bunk bed room where you could stay, and I don't know if traveling schools ever would stay there, but that's where we were able to stay, and we got plumbing and heat, and of course a lot of basketball practice.
Here in Winchester, people began to stockpile or bring in and dump off truckloads of firewood at the church parking lots. The Army came and got the wood, brought it to Sewanee, and it looked like a military camp in Sewanee. These Army trucks were going up and down. They'd pull up at someone's house, and the soldiers would get out, unload the wood, stack it on their porch. In some cases, they'd bring the wood inside and put it by the fireplace for people.
I don't remember how many of them. I don't remember how many trucks, but I remember their presence on campus, and I remember it was notable.
It was a wonderful time of cooperation that way. Well, it was the weekend, and those guys were supposed to be back in Birmingham on Sunday afternoon. Well, 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, the colonel of the unit comes in and says, we got to go, we're packing up. And we're dismayed. We're still right in the middle of this crisis, you can't leave. He said, no. He said, this assignment ends for us this afternoon. These men have to be back in Birmingham. They've all got to go to work tomorrow. We said, this won't work. So we made another call. And Bob Ayers called Jack Allen. Jack Allen calls Vice President and tells him what's going on. I was standing outside the police department, and this colonel comes out, and he's shaking his head. And he says, who do you people know? He said, my unit has been put on active duty for the duration. They stayed another whole week. And as they pull out of that parking lot going down Georgia Avenue to head on off to the interstate, the street was lined with people, cheering them and thanking them, applauding for the work that they had done. It was a crazy time.
I tell you what I do remember is how fun it was to be here. A lot of students actually left the mountain, but those of us that stayed, we had the best time.
University Avenue was a tunnel like this. The trees on either side, before they broke and collapsed, bent over like this, and so there was this tunnel. And here comes the students skating. And it was surreal in that way.
Ice skating, sledding, it was just really fun, and I think a lot of Sewanee couples came out of that ice storm.
We were residing in a fair amount of unknown that we all learned together when we were going to reemerge and get back to normal.
We eventually had to, impose restrictions. It's not like you've got to wear a mask, but you've got to stay off the quad.
I'm sure it was a scary time, and I just think about, I wish my parents were still alive and I could ask them what they were they worried about me. All I remember is it was a blast. We were hunkering down in each other's dorm rooms and just having so much fun.
There was this collective sense of camaraderie that I could sense from people who experienced it together, those people who stayed on campus.
It wasn't as disruptive as you might believe. And I think part of that is because of how the community came together to ensure that the experience that we were having was going to be a safe and memorable one. And that we were going to have to do extraordinary things just to sort of have a normal life.
So one response was that social response of looking out for each other, of the people in your dorm and the people that you knew, and sometimes walking out across campus to check on somebody in the dorm, or if somebody did manage to get off campus and get down to Chattanooga and come back and bring cookies. Cookies became almost sacramental.
I think I gained a lot as a young man. I remember having dinner, I believe it was at Dr. Jones's house, my freshman French professor, in the dark by candlelight with others. I remember trying to understand how we were going to spend a day and not knowing how long it was going to sort of be this way.
When I think back and look at the ways people began to help, these people in Winchester they never knew who got their wood. They just heard on the radio from Cowan or Winchester, they heard there was a need for wood, and they loaded up their pickup trucks and dumped it at their church, and the Army came and got it. And we never knew who those people were, but we knew that they responded, and they saw a need, and they did the good Southern neighbor thing. They did the good American thing in time of crisis.
My friends who experienced it, who were not basketball players, there was this sense of we got through this. It was difficult. It was scary. It was dark. It was cold. It was icy, but we did get through it.
One of the interesting things about the entire event was how much all of us here in this community, in this place, were going to be equally impacted by whatever it is that was going to become.
Well, it was a totalizing experience. There was nobody who wasn't affected by it. And not only were you not affected by it in the sense of everybody was cold, but visually, when you looked at the campus, the entire campus was affected.
So it wasn't just as if, at that time, 1,200 students were going to miss class. It was the entire community, all of the professors, all of the staff, all of the people here that were on the mountain at the time were going to have this shared experience. And I think that that became evident over the course of the first and second day. Again, there was no email broadcast from the registrar that said, there's going to be a change, or the dean of students announcing to stay in your dorms. It was just very different. I think as we emerged and as we gathered and as we considered what was happening around us, it became an opportunity to have this shared experience together that was, again, at 18 years old or 19 years old, you sort of began to realize was going to be unique.
Prior to 1985, the quad was covered not with grass, but moss. The impact of the loss of so many trees, thousands of trees across campus, was so severe that it changed the campus ecology. And if you look up into the treetops, you'll see trees that go up and then they're sort of flat on top and then spread out. What that is from 30 years ago, 35 years ago. It's these trees that had their tops broken out in the ice storm, and then they began to regrow. But the branches that were left were the ones that were not in the crown.
I don't remember it being tragic. I know that there were tragic parts of it on many people in the area. For myself and my roommate, my friends, and other students on campus, it was just a unique opportunity to be in community in quite a different way.
What came out of it was just new friendships and a little bit stronger bond to this place, if that's possible.
It is something that lingers as a part of the stories we tell.
I think every one of them remembers the experience.
When I mentioned it to my teammate a few days ago, he said, "Oh, I remember it well."
I graduated 34, 35 years ago, and it's still a topic of conversation with my roommate and peers, and we try and kind of piece together what I'm sure has exaggerated over the years.
When we get together, we still talk about that. What we did, where we were when the power went out, when the big tree came down next to Cleveland Dorm, when when the Army came in. Obviously, you know, this was not a global event, it was not a national event, it was a local event, but it was one of those that anchored the narrative for a whole generation of Sewanee students.
There's no doubt that it served as a moment that galvanized many of us and informed what the subsequent time here at Sewanee was.
Now, a lot of other things happened, but if you talk to that generation of students, they'll always talk about their experience in the ice storm.
You can say, "Oh, I was there during the ice storm of 1985. It just is a special experience.
You know, again, this is part of my Sewanee story of my life, and everybody here has their own. The way I think about this particular event is that it's part of the tapestry of my college experience. It was part of this wonderful 4 years on campus that was transformative in so many ways. It was woven into everything that I took from Sewanee in terms of the impact it had on my life.
I've been a part of a lot of things in 51 years at Sewanee, but it was a moment of great difficulty, but great inspiration because of the way people responded and looked after each other.
This event served as an opportunity for Sewanee to show how it can live and dwell in community together. I think about what we're currently going through today with the pandemic, and by no means am I trivializing the pandemic down to an ice storm that comes and goes. It is an enormous burden on our students when they arrive to re-articulate and re-architect how they are students here, both for the new first-year students and for the returning students. The returning students have the benefit of knowing what Sewanee is when there's no pandemic. And the first-year students are going to have to visualize what Sewanee can be when it's over. And what we have planned for them is a situation where we're going to call on them to live and dwell in community under unusual circumstances that nobody has ever seen before. And the expectation is high. And what I'm comforted by is the fact that these students are going to be able to do it.